Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our expert discussion event. My name is Bilge Hanalagöz. I am the Director of Foreign Policy Program at the Center for Iran Studies. Today, with our three distinguished speakers, we are going to discuss the future of nuclear negotiations. As you may know, there is an ongoing diplomacy. The first round of negotiations started in April 2021, and the last one was held in June 2021. And at the end of this month, on November 29, we are going to witness the seventh round of the negotiations. At this point, three perspectives, namely European, Chinese, and Russian perspectives, becomes on the spotlight because they are the actors who are on the negotiation table. So with our speakers, we are going to focus whether there is a consensus among the parties on the P4+1 side, or will there be some different perspectives in the future if there is a long distance in the negotiation process. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Professor Andrei Chuprikin is a senior lecturer at the School of Asian Studies at the National Research University. He's an Arabist and specialized in political and economic evaluation of the Middle East. Professor Fan Hongda is a professor at the Middle East Studies Institute of Shanghai International Studies University, China. He focuses on studies of Middle Eastern politics and international relations. And our last speaker, Przemysław Osiewicz, is an associate professor at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, Poland, and a scholar at the Middle East Institute, Washington, D.C. He's going to join us within minutes. I'd like to start with Professor Andrei Chuprikin. Thank you again for accepting our invitation. It's a great pleasure to host you. Russia has intensive relations with Iran, and Russia is also on the negotiation process. So it seems that there is a kind of a consensus with Russia and the remaining parties. But on the other hand, Iran has its own red lines. So we really wonder what's going to be Russia's position in the nuclear negotiations, and will there be a kind of a dilemma for Russia if the parties, especially Iran and United States, insist on their own red lines? The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes, and at the end of all the speech, I would like to also remind our audience to join us with their questions. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of all three speakers. Professor Chuprikin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an interesting discussion that we're going to have today. The question about the Russian position towards the JCPOA negotiations with Iran, as I think, are not the crucial moment in this particular long-standing story. Russia is performing quite a cautious dance about the situation, keeping distance from, as you said, both red lines of Iran and the United States, and watching the development of the situation. So, to be clear about this, I prefer to look at the situation from the point of view of Iranian political elites, to a possible extent, of course, and trying to look at the whole situation through the optics of Tehran. And what comes to mind, first and foremost, is that there are several important points that influence the Iranian position towards everything what started happening from the times of Trump in the whole JCPOA deal. So let's take it point by point. If I were in Tehran, what would hit my conscience first and foremost? First, it's the narrative of the rogue nation that has been promoted by the United States. And this narrative is actually not helping any resolutions on any negotiations that were held or are going to be held. So, and we've seen that in April and in June. And the second point, which actually was called a red line from the Iranian part, or a precondition, I would say, from Tehran, was the release of the frozen financial assets. This issue strikes me as probably one of the most important things, because Iranians quite justifiably look at that, at the freeze of the assets as a highway robbery. I mean, it's their money, and somebody puts a restriction on their financial capabilities without anything that can justify this thing. Well, we understand that this mode of operation is quite common in international relations and has been common for at least the last 4 or 5 decades, but still it goes as sort of a very practical restriction for Tehran to approach this situation logically. Then we have two things which are directly tied with the nuclear character of the agreement, with the nuclear agenda. That's, of course, the infamous AUKUS that, according to certain experts, and I tend to agree with them, gives Iran the moral advantage to defend its rights for nuclear development. Why? Because no nuclear Australia receives nuclear-driven submarines, which are in their turn outside the inspections purview. And this way, the non-proliferation, which was a primary and is a primary justification of the posture of the US, goes practically down the drain. In the same direction, the fact that the US is using Israel as a partner in the anti-Iranian campaign actually is drawing quite a lot of frowns. We know that, and we see that there is a narrative of human rights violations in Iran. One might say, taking the other position or the other side of the conundrum, that Israel is actually no Mother Teresa itself in this sphere of human activity or country's activity. And regarding the nuclear sphere, it is an absolutely common knowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. We're all just closing eyes on that. And that adds up to the moral justification that Iran feels it is liable to in the posture towards this peddling of the non-proliferation principle by the United States. Going further along those lines, we might as well conclude that a large portion of reasoning in the American posture is due to the Saudi confrontation with Tehran, thus calling the whole sincerity of Washington position into doubt, especially that the exit from the JCPOA was done by Trump, of all American presidents. So the Israeli-Saudi connection is more than clear in this respect. As I see it, Tehran might be asking himself, why else did Trump renege on the deal at the moment when actually Iran was complying with all the restrictions? And I should remind everyone that that was the Russian position from the start. To be just, we might say that Brussels' position was actually very close to the same thing. So, for me, as looking through the lens of Tehran, it is absolutely clear that there should have been some ulterior motives in the Washington's position. So why to concede with that? Regarding the future in this, if we take into considerations all those points, well, they are not the total points that could be discussed, but even those, then we probably can look into the future of the negotiations, which is the thing that interests us the most. Well, what about the future? Russia almost certainly is going to press to the resolution of this whole thing. As a matter of fact, together with Brussels, because Europeans are very interested in a comprehensive solution of the JCPOA, because they have a lot of economical interests with Tehran. And then there is an understanding that the situation which was found around the JCPOA because of Trump exiting from it does not add to the security of the whole Middle Eastern area, which is actually the main concern of Russia, and not only Russia. The Washington's idea of the sanctions, that they will force Iran to run into the American loving embrace, and the buying Boeing instead of Airbus, and the whole issue started from this particular thing, did not happen. Iran was already prepared, having been under sanctions more or less since 1979. Now, the support of China, which increased tenfold during that time, offered a significant, if not the total, advantage. At least when experts, not Iranian of course, say that the unemployment in Iran does not grow lower than 16%, and the population living below level of poverty is no less than 34%. I say that these figures are an indication that Tehran is coping with sanctions quite well, because it should have been expected the situation to become much worse. Even the internal dissent, on which as usual Washington placed its bet, albeit high, that is, in the 50% level, is basically directed on the bad coping with the COVID, and absolutely not on the anti-American discourse, which also is an indication to the parties participant to the talks about JCPOA on how to negotiate those very difficult waters of Iranian-American confrontation. Moreover, as I mentioned previously already, Europe is absolutely keen on settling the Iranian problem to the advantage of Brussels, which totally means coming to the satisfying settlement. Russia is there as well, but cautious, very cautious, but definitely pro-opening restrictions on the politically possible and acceptable conditions. Acceptable, we might also comment here that acceptable, not American acceptable, of course, but at least European acceptable, and of course Russian acceptable. China is indicating that it's not going to renege on the agreements with Iran. They have no ideological or other reservations, only economic expediency. On top, one should remember that Iran is a crucial partner to the Belt and Road Initiative in the Middle East, so China will cover for Iran whatever happens. That's the way I see it. Then again, let's not be very pessimistic, because there is another factor that is coming into the fold of this situation. That's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's rising activity in the bilateral negotiations with Tehran, using Iraq as a go-between. From the Iranian perspective, all this is making American position vulnerable. Actually, from the Russian perspective, the view is the same. Lately, Iran, judging by the open access media, made significant advances in the uranium processing technology. This happened exactly because the American rogue position towards the JCPOA made it possible, leaving Iran in an advantageous position when Tehran used the American exit as an excuse to squeeze through the crack in the agreement. This advantage definitely encourages the Iranian elite to pursue a more assertive policy in this track, and they no doubt are not going to lose this technological advantage to the vague hints coming from Washington. This is, from my point of view, is more important than any political position of Russia or Europe or even United States of America. On top of this, we add to this the American exit from Afghanistan, which is considered by the Islamic world as a flight. So it looks like the mighty America has become not so mighty, and that is an open door to exploit this weakness as it is considered by the greater Middle East in the American defense. So why bow to the demands at this particular time? And this adds to the difficulty in resolving this situation, because Iran, regardless of the position of other parties to the negotiations, is attaining more and more assertive and I would say concrete positions in their demands and their outview. On top of this, let's not forget that conservatives came to power, the new prime minister, which is very clear. And the chief negotiator appointed recently to these talks, the Iranian chief negotiator, was the ardent enemy of the agreement in the first place. So the situation is quite grave. So to answer the question, what is the Russian position towards those negotiations? As I said, to add to the description of this position as cautious, I have to say that actually, in fact, the future of JCPOA is based not in Moscow and not in Washington and not in Brussels. It is based squarely in the Middle East. It depends to a large extent on the results of the Saudi-Iranian talks. And exactly when Riyadh tells its American allies that Iran is no longer enfant terrible of the Middle East, and that will be the solution of the Iranian problem as we look at it. And probably we will see the emergence of two new nuclear powers in the region, Iran and Saudi Arabia, because Riyadh is watching closely all those evolutions that are happening around Iran and its nuclear problem. And the reverential atomic club has a significant leak and slowly loses its importance. More and more countries are questioning the monopoly, and this is actually the point that should be discussed in the framework of this JCPOA. It is not only about Iran, it is about the whole non-proliferation, non-nuclear, or vice versa, proliferated and nuclear world that we're facing. So that means that probably with those negotiations that are not going to bring positive results this year, that's for sure, but we are going to witness the changes on a principal structure of non-nuclear world and the role of the main nuclear powers in it. The role is diminishing, and if anything, the JCPOA problems are an indication of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I will have questions, but maybe I should wait the Q&A sessions. Our audience has already started to send me questions too, because Russia is also an important actor for Turkey. So we really pay great attention on what Russia perceives, in which perspective Russia perceives Iran's nuclear program. I'd like to move to Professor Honda. China is also a very influential actor, especially in the recent months. There has been an agreement between Iran and China, the 25-year-old agreement, and on the other hand, China is very much dependent on the energy resources of the Persian Gulf. As Professor Chubrigin has mentioned, the Saudi perspective is also important, and we all know that China and Saudi Arabia is also having close relations. The same question, what is a Chinese perspective towards the nuclear negotiations? Will there be also red lines for China, or will there be area of sensitivity between China and the United States if Iran insists on its own red lines? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I will answer your question later. Hello, everyone. I'm Honda Fan from China. It's my pleasure to discuss the upcoming JCPOA negotiations with you. I must thank Dr. Belgahan for her invitation. Many thanks. The title of my speech is Can the Siemens Vienna negotiation bring good luck to JCPOA? On November 4th, Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Ali Bagheri Khani posted on social media that to start the negotiations on 29 November in Vienna. On the same day, Eric Mora, the Deputy Secretary General of European External Action Service, also announced after consultations with all JCPOA participants and the United States, there is agreement to resume talks in Vienna on November 29. At this time, whether Iranian administration will continue the JCPOA negotiations in Vienna finally came to an end. Obviously, without the help of other parties, it is almost impossible for the United States and Iran to return to Vienna to continue the JCPOA negotiations. To save the JCPOA, the European Union, China, and Russia have conducted a series of diplomatic activities between Iran and the United States. Finally, the good news came. The seventh round of Vienna talks will begin on November 29. But this is only the first step. Will the coming talk end in fruitless, or will a major breakthrough be made? This mainly depends on the attitudes of the United States and Iran. In order to bring the United States back to the JCPOA and push Iran to fully implement JCPOA again, the parties' council started negotiations on April 6 this year in Vienna. Iranian Rouhani administration conducted 6 rounds of such talks, but failed to reach a final solution. Since President Raisi took office in early August, the new Iranian administration has not been very active in the Vienna JCPOA negotiations. President Raisi has made it clear that the foreign policy of the new Iranian government will not be limited to the nuclear agreement. The administration has insisted that the United States must lift its unjust sanctions against Iran first. There is no point in continuing the previous negotiations that will not yield positive results. The next negotiations should have a clear expected result. Iran also believes that future JCPOA negotiations in Vienna can't involve Iran's missile development and regional policy. In fact, both the United States and Iran don't want to give up the revival of the JCPOA. Without the constraint of the JCPOA, Iran's nuclear project will be more difficult to control. This is certainly not what the United States expects to see. Meanwhile, it seems that if Tehran does not return to full compliance of the JCPOA, the sanctions on Iran will continue. So Washington and Tehran are also looking for a way to continue the Vienna negotiations. In the past few months, in order to push Iran to return to the negotiating table in Vienna, the United States has continued to communicate with Russia, Britain, France, and Germany, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and China. On August 24th, the U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Malley, said in an interview that the United States is prepared to make compromises on difficult issues if Tehran does the same. Iran has also repeatedly stated that it does not oppose returning to the JCPOA negotiations. Of course, Tehran knows that unless the United States and Iran resume implementation of the JCPOA, it will be difficult to lift the international sanctions that Iran is suffering, and it will naturally be difficult for Iran to achieve better development. Nowadays, I think Washington's demand for JCPOA is more urgent than that of Iran. Washington's maximum pressure has indeed had a serious impact on Iran, and Iran used to be more eager than the United States to revive JCPOA as soon as possible. However, the successive rounds of the Vienna negotiations failed to achieve desired results. This disappointed the Iranian side. The Raisi administration's interest in Vienna negotiations has therefore declined. In addition, the U.S. failure in Afghanistan not only further eased the external pressure on Iran, but also shows that U.S. interest in the Middle East is declining. On the other hand, according to the provisions of JCPOA, Iran has the right to redevelop its nuclear program if other signatories fail to perform the JCPOA. In fact, Iran has already done so and has made major advances in its nuclear program. Iran's move like this has deeply disturbed the United States and some of its partners in Europe and elsewhere. And in recent years, Iran has paid more and more attention to eastward diplomacy, and Iran's relations with China and Russia are getting better. These new trades make the United States and its allies hope to resume the JCPOA as soon as possible, so as to eliminate the challenges posed by Iran's nuclear development, and considering Iran's important geostrategic positive positions, those countries also hope to establish normal relations or better relations with Iran. However, there is still a seemingly insurmountable gap between ideal and realities. Many sanctions imposed by the United States on Iran are supported by law and can't be lifted quickly through executive orders. And there are still strong anti-Iran and anti-JCPOA voices in the United States. The internal politics of the United States has determined that the sanctions against Iran are difficult to lift in a short time. In other words, it seems that Washington cannot meet Tehran's public JCPOA negotiations demands. On the other hand, it is also difficult for Iran to agree to include missile and regional policy issues in the JCPOA negotiations. Unfortunately, the two issues are precisely what the United States and its allies, such as Israel, are very concerned about. And there are also strong anti-US and anti-JCPOA feelings in Iran. Iran's internal politics has also determined that it is difficult to compromise in the struggle against the United States. In other words, it seems that it is difficult for Tehran to meet Washington's public demands for JCPOA negotiations. Once beaten, twice shy. Iran requires the United States to promise not to withdraw again once it returns to the JCPOA. Compared with other controversial issues, I think it is possible for the United States and Iran to reach a consensus on these issues. Also, the United States has room for lifting some sanctions against Iran and helping Iran take back some funds that have been frozen abroad. As far as Iran's missile and regional policies, although Iran does not agree to discuss the two issues in the JCPOA negotiations, can new negotiations be started outside the JCPOA negotiations to deal with the two issues? On the other hand, the United States can't expect to solve new problems within the old framework. On the other hand, as far as Iran is concerned, if Iran can get something to make its country better and its regime more stable, is it sure that Iran will not consider discussing the issues of missile and regional policy? For Russia administration, which needs political recognition at home and abroad, talks with no real gains are meaningless. The new Iranian administration needs to see talks with desired results. In early this month, Ned Price, the spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State, said at a press conference that it is possible to reach an agreement on JCPOA negotiations in a short period of time, but this requires active cooperation from Iran. Frankly speaking, policymakers in Washington, D.C. should understand that It was the United States unilateral withdrawal from the JCPOA that caused the current problem. Moreover, some U.S. sanctions, including those directed at Iran, have been increasingly opposed by more and more countries. The United States should make more active contributions for future JCPOA negotiations. It is foreseeable that if this upcoming round of JCPOA negotiations is still as fruitless as the previous rounds, Iran will be more passive towards such negotiations in the future. And because of the urgent domestic need for nuclear energy, Iran is likely to continue to develop its nuclear program. This is a result that the United States and its allies in the Middle East, such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other GCC countries, are willing to see. Of course, if this is the case, the United States will not lift sanctions on Iran. In this way, all stories will return to the beginning. In my opinion, considering the domestic and international environment facing Iran and the United States, the two countries probably do not want to do too much useless work. Obviously, in the current background of competition among major powers, the United States will not spend too much resources in Iran. Iran, whose people are increasingly dissatisfied, also needs a better international environment for development. The United States and Iran have a common need to ease tensions. So the upcoming JCPOA negotiations in Vietnam can be given some cautious optimism. That's all. Thank you. As for the China's attitude towards the JCPOA negotiation, I can say whether in the process of reaching the 2015 JCPOA or now in the promotion of the Vietnam JCPOA negotiations, China has played a role of an active promoters and coordinators. Many people in the world, including some Chinese, believe that China does not want to see the improvement of U.S.-Iranian relations. I don't think so. I think the normalization of U.S.-Iranian relations is beneficial to China. U.S.-Iran confrontations affect the better development of China-Iran relations and China-U.S. relations. The Meng Wanzhou event of Huawei can support my view. For some time to come, the bilateral relations between China, the United States, and Iran may still affect each other. I believe China should look at U.S.-Iran relations from a broader perspective. Maybe this is the reason why China is very positive on JCPOA. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Fan. I will also have questions at the end of the session. And here I want to move to Pirshemek. Hello, Pirshemek. It's nice to see you. You have recently written a book entitled Foreign Policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran Between Ideology and Pragmatism. So you analyze the structure of Iranian foreign policy, and according to you, will the new administration have a positive or negative effect on the nuclear negotiations? And also, there are different requests from the parties. The Iran and the United States have different requests. According to you, which requests will be more prominent in the upcoming negotiations?
Merhaba, günaydın. I should repeat and sorry for being late, but at the same time, many thanks to İRAM administration for helping me to join our meeting. So there were some technical problems, but they were solved. I'm very glad to be here, and at the very beginning, let me thank you for Bilgehan for the invitation, and I'm very happy that I'm here with in the panel with distinguished participants like Andrei Chupregin and Mr. Hong Da-Fan. So it's my pleasure to be here. If I could I will just begin addressing your questions. Probably, well, I would say. First of all, I would say it's too early to say whether the new authorities, I mean the new executive, new executive body, I mean the president and the rest of the Iranian administration, whether they will be successful or not, right? Obviously, we wish them all the best, right? But at the same time, I think that the task President Raisi has is much more difficult than the one which was witnessed by the previous president, right? I mean, the situation differs because in 2015, when the agreement was reached, in my opinion, there was like a kind of positive aura around the president, his administration. I mean, the Iranian president, right? And these negotiations, there was like a big hope in the Iranian society, and the president. And the president had almost full public support, even if some members of the Iranian society criticized the authorities. They mainly criticized the then president for internal matters, not for his strategy in foreign policy. Unfortunately, and I would like to underline that the U.S. decision to withdraw from the JCPOA in 2018 somehow changed the course of action. In my opinion, it was a huge mistake of the U.S. administration, because I mean, even if you think about it in a pragmatic way, how can you control anything, or how can you encourage any side for cooperation if you leave the table and you don't want to talk with your adversaries or with another side, right? So, from the very beginning, I think it was a huge strategic mistake. I mean, as a result, right now we have a situation in which the new administration, I mean, the new Iranian administration, will have to engage in these negotiations. So, the situation is pretty tough, especially economic situation in Iran is very difficult right now. That's what we know from some agency news. That was something, for example, what was already signaled by Foreign Minister of Iran, Hossein Amir Abdullahian. You may remember that he openly said that a gesture of goodwill is necessary at this stage. So he even mentioned the sum of $10 billion, if I remember correctly, right? That the money should be released by the U.S. authorities. In response, we heard from the U.S. Department of State that there is no way the United States will make any gestures of goodwill. And we have a situation in which everything looks quite promising in terms of EU-Iran relations, or to be more precise, with actually it looks promising once we include other important participants of the whole Vienna talks, except for the United States, right? So it looks quite promising. However, I would say really, I mean, the new administration in Iran, it's not only about money, I think. I think the new administration, the new Iranian administration, and personally President Raisi, they need a good argument. They could, I'm sorry for this word, sell to public, sell to Iranian public, right? Saying that, okay, we will re-enter the talks. Look, that's what that's what we have already achieved. We achieved for example, money we could spend here on public issues or something like that, right? So this kind of success is really needed. I mean, once you enter negotiations, I think it's not a big deal for the United States to release these $10 billion, especially as the money belongs to Iran. And I would say this kind of gesture will not threaten the United States, even if the negotiations are unsuccessful later. I think it will make no difference. At the same time, knowing something about the Iranian society, I'm quite sure that that's the main objective of the new executive body of the presidential office. They need a kind of success. They need this kind of gesture in order to justify the actions, in order to be able to, let's say, rejoin the negotiations, resume these negotiations in Vienna in the end of this month, hopefully. Well, I wonder what's going to happen on the American side. Well, we know that the European Union is very positive. There were these talks in Brussels. The initiative was not maybe very warmly welcomed by the People's Republic of China or the Russian Federation, and I can understand that, because it looked like a little, that's what was signaled by Mikhail Ulyanov, for example, the Russian ambassador to the Vienna organizations. And I agree with him that it looked like it was an attempt to bypass other members, other participants of these talks. However, well, sometimes it is so that we have good intentions and the image is probably not the best one. All in all, I mean, the outcome is quite positive, because at least we have this declaration of the Iranian delegation that they will come to Vienna and they are ready to negotiate, although some Iranian diplomats underline the fact that Iran is not ready to resume negotiations at the moment, whatever it means. I think we can come back to that later in our discussion, if you like, because I would be more than happy to hear your position about it. But to sum up, I think that it looks very promising. Well, we can see that the new Iranian administration is open to talks. We can deliberate, okay, what's the reason for that? Whether they are forced free to do that by a harsh economic situation at home, or whether it's a kind of pragmatic policy, or a gesture of goodwill or whatsoever. Well, I cannot really tell, because I think nobody knows except for those involved in these talks. I mean, those members of the Iranian delegation. I think it's like the truth is, as always, somewhere in the middle, right? So yet I would like to underline the fact that if the outcome is positive and all sides reach the agreement, let's say in 2022, I think nobody will really be interested in real intentions and so on, because the outcome, the resumption of talks and finally a kind of revival of this deal would suit not only states or entities involved in the negotiation process. That would be really important for the whole international community. Why it is so important? Because at the same time, Iran is still enriching uranium, and while we are talking, Iran is reaching like the one of the red lines. Probably in December they will reach more than it's already like more than 120 kilograms of uranium to 235, and they are reaching this red line. Once this red line is crossed, it may be really it can be really impossible to come back to the state of affairs of 2015. that we will have to initiate a new negotiation process with other provisions, other objectives, and so on. And most of diplomats representing all states interested or engaged in these talks underline this fact that Iran is dangerously approaching this red line, after crossing of which it will be really hard to resume these talks as they were left in June this year. Thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you. Here we can continue with the Q&A. First of all, I have a question for three speakers. I actually would like to learn your thoughts about the possible scenarios. What are the possible scenarios in case the JCPOA cannot be saved? Professor Chubukyan, I can start with you, and then Professor Hongda and Pirjamek.
Well, actually speaking, I think this question is unanswerable in principle, because we don't know whether the JCPOA is going to be revived or it is going to be trashed at the end of the day. But what we know for sure, at least I know absolutely positive, that the JCPOA, if revived, it will not have the same nature or the same details that it had before. To arrive at the revival of the JCPOA, it had to be, and it will be, amended in several absolutely principal aspects. And my colleague absolutely justifiably said, very clear, and that is the concern. Iran not only is approaching to red lines, Iran is becoming more and more assertive in this respect. Iran feels that it is justifiably needs to have this power. And I don't think, and I'm talking now as an Orientalist, I don't think that the current leadership or elites of Iran is going to stop in reaching this level of power. And that is the main problem with the JCPOA. So it will be amended if there is an intention to save the agreement as a whole. So that's basically the answer that I can give. Otherwise, the rest is going to be unjustifiable forecast, and I'm not ready to go there.
Okay, Professor Pan.
Thanks. I think it's not an easy problem to deal with. Maybe it need a long time. It still need a long time. I found that today, American President Joe Biden today speak out a new plan for JCPOA, but I can't have much faith in this new plan. For me, maybe there is still a long way to go to reach a real agreement on JCPOA. Thanks.
Yeah, if I could answer the question, I agree with Professor Chuprigin that it's like fortune telling a little bit, and we don't know what we should know, and maybe it's good that we don't know everything. Maybe he was not the best person in world's history, but you may remember Chancellor Bismarck, who once said that people should not see how policies make, and it's the same about sausage. So maybe it's better than we don't know the details. But however, I'm quite sure, and again, for example, I agree with Professor Chuprigin that the New Deal will have, and hopefully it will not be called a deal, but this time it will be an international agreement, which will be contrary to the one to the document signed in 2015, the one which will be also accepted approved by the U.S. Congress, right? I think that's important, right? To make sure that this time we'll have a legal document which will have a form of international agreement, the one which is registered, and it will be much harder for all those entities involved in the process to leave the agreement, right? So otherwise, we'll always have this kind of risk that one or state or another may suddenly decide that this let's say deal does not meet our expectations, and that's why we withdraw right now. So that's crucial to make sure that we'll have a full-fledged international agreement, international treaty registered at the United Nations, approved by all high parties to this agreement.
Thank you. Professor Chubrikin, from the audience, there is a question to you. Gözde Toprak asks the question. Putin once said nuclear-armed Iran is a strategic threat. So what Russia is thinking about Iran's possible possession of nuclear weapons?
Russia is against that. Russia is a staunch supporter of the non-proliferation agreement. But Russia is only being very practical to limit Iran's possibility to weaponize uranium and obtain nuclear weapons. One has to, it's a road with two ways. I mean, it is not done through just pressuring Iran without giving something as a bargaining chip. The new political leadership of Iran, I mean, President Raisi, as my colleague previously said, he needs to present something to the audience, to the Iranian audience. So that is actually the gist of the deal. What should attract Iran enough to agree on the terms of stopping before reaching the red line, or before obtaining the nuclear weapon? And that is all that those negotiations should be about if they are to succeed. So Russian position is non-proliferation principle should be applied strictly without any revision. But to be practical, you have to be positive in your dealings with countries like Iran, not negative.
Okay, thank you. Professor Fan, there's a question for you about the 25-year agreement. Actually, the question is, Iran is highlighting this agreement, whereas China prefers remaining silent. So, according to you, will this agreement create a huge opportunity for Iran to have some economic capacity? So, Professor Fan?
Sorry.
Okay. Could you hear the question? It's about the 25-year-old agreement.
No. I heard your question.
Okay.
Frankly speaking, the 25 deal. I know many Chinese scholars have different opinions about 25 deals. Many Iranian scholars told me they also have different opinions about 25 deal. According to my research, maybe the 25 deal. The tomorrow, what's the tomorrow of 25 5 deals? I think it's still a problem in both in both of the two countries. Until today, there is not have no. Maybe it's not clear yet. To me, 25 deal is not clear yet in Iran and China. It's my opinion.
Thank you. And the question came to you, Pirshemek. It's about the possible follow-up agreement. What will happen if United States insists on a follow-up agreement?
Meaning, like additional agreements, or?
Yeah, about the missile program and Iran's involvement in the Middle East, the military involvement.
I would say it's very likely. As you know, I'm Polish, so I do not represent. Maybe luckily, I do not represent the U.S. administration, so I can only speculate. But still, I'm quite sure that the U.S. administration would like to, because that was signaled at the very beginning, that they would like to come with some, let's say, new requirements. For the Iranian delegation, right? The position which was always neglected by the Iranian side, and I think we can understand why. It is obvious, right? So once they enter any negotiations related to the JCPOA, they do not want to negotiate anything else, because actually that would expand the scope of talks. And it will make life harder for negotiators involved, right? So I don't think that the Iranian delegation will agree on that. I also have serious doubts if suddenly other representatives of higher parties will change their mind and increase or the scope of requirements. So I think it's very unlikely. The U.S. administration may come with such an idea. I have no idea. They may come with such an idea, but at the same time, I'm almost sure that the other high parties of the deal, of the JCPOA, will not agree on that, because these are mainly very experienced negotiators, and they know that once the scope of the subject of the negotiations is expanded, it's the best recipe for a failure, right? So I don't think it's very likely, although, as I said, I would not be surprised if the US administration or even the European Union came with such an idea, especially with regard to the missile program.
Thank you. Let me check the audience if there is another question. Okay. Actually, I don't see another question. Maybe a last question again to Professor Chubrigin. May I ask your opinion about the Iran and Russia relationship, especially in Syria, as far as we follow from the journals, there is kind of a different approach between Iran and Russia. Would it affect the position of Russia in the nuclear negotiations?
Iran and Russia are both different countries, okay? And being different countries, they have different interests, and they, of course, have different approaches to those interests or to the implementation. Iran and Russia has absolutely different approaches to the implementation of the Syrian file, and that is absolutely evident. Everyone knows that. But as I said, Russia, being very pragmatic, does not allow those differences which they face in the Syrian scale, to touch anything else concerning Iran. I hope that the same is valid for Iranian side. Russia has an absolutely clear position on the talks on JCPOA, and as Dr. Asevich said, the position of other parties are similar. If we don't take into consideration Americans. So I don't think that relations or contradictions or the difference of views, difference of position, maybe for better say, in Syria will affect Russian approaches to the JCPOA. Russia might be keen on settling the differences with Iran in Syria through negotiations or through mutual understanding of the problems they're facing, using the umbrella of the JCPOA, or maybe even not an umbrella of the JCPOA, or using the idea of the JCPOA. But it is highly unlikely in the nearest future, as I say. I think that Russian foreign arm is quite clearly separating those two issues from one another in attempt not to mix everything in one basket.
Thank you. Professor Chuprikin, there is also another question to you. I think Turkish audience is very much interested in what Russia sees. So the question is this. What do you think about the role of Israel regarding restarting Vienna process? Is it possible that Israel would behave autonomously such as air strike? How does Russia assess that possibility?
The most important thing to understand that I'm not a member of the Russian administration. I'm not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I'm not anybody official, so I can express my personal opinion, of course, based on the fact that I'm a Russian origin researcher. So I will answer it this way. The Israel position about the JCPOA has already been announced by the United States of America. The whole issue of the missiles, an attempt to engage missile problem through the JCPOA is the idea of Israel. And this is important to understand. That's not an American idea. It's an Israeli idea. So Israel is already involved directly in the JCPOA talks. Israel was involved directly in the suspension of American participation in the JCPOA, although that was the double entendre because Israel and Saudi Arabia were both involved. Now, I have to agree that I see very little possibility this missile issue becoming an issue of negotiations because the rest of the negotiators will be opposed to that. But it might prolong the negotiations per se as a process, because if the Americans comply to Israeli demands and put this issue upward, then the negating of this particular part of negotiations will take a lot of time, a lot of other secondary negotiations. So that way, Israel will achieve what it has been achieving for a long time, and that is the annulment, or at least stopping the JCPOA in operation. That was actually the total goal of Israel, because JCPOA takes away the argument of Israel Middle Eastern policy the argument that says that Iran is posing a direct threat to the existence of the State of Israel. And with the JCPOA in place, it is more and more difficult to extend this article, this argument on the current policy.
Okay, I think we are about to finish our panel. I know you are all busy, you have all intensive programs, and I would like to thank you for the three speakers to join us on this event, and I guess it has been a fruitful event. We have discussed the main issues. And I would like to also thank the audience for following the session from the beginning. We all hope that there is going to be a peaceful solution. It's our region, so we need this kind of resolve regarding the Iran's nuclear program. Again, thank you for all of you to be part of this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you.
Let's hope so.
The best.